Christian conspiracy theory will blow your mind, one verse at a time.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program. We are your hosts, Aaron and Matthew Miller. It's good to be with you again as we cover the arrest. This is part 2 of Actus, Reus. So let's get Aaron's opening comment as we go farther. And as soon as he's done with his opening comments, we can just get straight away to this list of what the acts of the fallen were.
So where we left off in the first part of Actus Reus is what these entities did when they were here, and I think now we're going to really be getting to the nitty-gritties of this. The Book of Enoch doesn't come out and specifically say what exactly they were doing, so it kind of left us clues to of where to look. And I mean, I guess we can find the same thing with the Holy Scriptures, the perfect Scriptures, is that with this issue it is very vague, and I think it's really open to our debates and interpretation, and but I think Enoch was trying to kind of show what was evident, through evidence in his text of what they actually did, so it's giving us the resources where to look. So I cropped in a bunch of different instances in the Book of Enoch, and we'll be going over them, and back to you.
All right. Well, the one verse that we covered in the first installment of this was just absolutely off the charts, what was being inferred there in the text. Absolutely amazing. And now that people can take an actual look at this once they have your translation in hand, they just need to brace for themselves, and the contents, everything that we're going on over here is in Enoch chapter 8. We're going to talk about, oh my God, all of the things that they were doing. So Aaron, let's get into it.
Well, I think before we go into chapter 8, we were working on chapter 7 in the previous episode, and I think it's really important to mention 7 verse 5, because we left off speaking about possible genetic engineering going on. So I'll read 7:5 off the top. And they began to sin against the birds and the beasts and the reptiles and the fish, and to devour each other's flesh and drink the blood. This is speaking of not the fallen themselves, but their giant sons. And as you can see, I'm not sure if we touched on this in Mens Rea, but it seems evident that these angels themselves weren't really engaging in a lot of these things. They were just teaching people how to do them, and specifically their sons. And we know how in the Old Testament the giants are called the Rephaim, which means in Hebrew the healers. And if everything that we touched on in the last broadcast is true, that they were teaching them these things, that they were teaching them pharmaceuticals and such, they wanted their sons to be healers. But if they also taught them this root cutting, then genetic engineering is really very clear here. And with this sinning against the birds and the beasts and the reptiles and the fish, what are your comments there?
Well, I have always stated this, that when you look at just their sheer size, this comes down to a matter of calories per day. What would it take to actually be able to feed these giants? Now, this verse right here, it brings it right out. Ladies and gentlemen, you really have to come to grips with this, and this goes hand in hand with their waste. You just don't understand the quantity of waste you would be dealing with. But, of course, the prime thing you have to deal with is the calories themselves. You have to get enough calories. This verse states very plainly that they were committing sins of bestiality and creating their own chimeras that had obviously angelic roots, and we know dealing with the Ten Commandments, the rule of the fourth generation. So that seed would have been tainted for 4 generations out. But when the rubber really hits the road, you're talking about how much calories would be in one brontosaurus. Let's just go to the big scale. Because no one understands this. Even one of these giants at 3 stories tall. Ladies and gentlemen, do the math. Just do the math. What about freshwater sources, ladies and gentlemen? In order for them to be sustained, it was just not possible without somehow getting a larger food source, because literally in 3 days' time they could devour 100 head of cattle with no way to replenish that food source. And quickly they would not only not able to be sustained, but the human population would not be able to be sustained in this dual problem. Because, ladies and gentlemen, let's just talk about the bladder. A humanoid, 3 stories tall, would have a bladder the size of most swimming pools. Do you have any idea how quickly they could foul the fertile fields? It would get ugly, and it would get ugly in short order. They would be forced, due to hunger, they would be driven to that point where they would just grab cows and eat them, not taking the time to get the blood out of them. They would become ravenous. This would make them psychopathic, uncontrollable.
It also says here that they even ate each other.
Right. It even drove them to fighting over food sources to the point that when they slew their brothers, they would eat their brothers. So, ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand that you and I can waste away when we starve. What makes you think an entity that is half angel is able to waste away? No, they would be driven to ravenous states with this hunger. And this ties into other apocryphal books talking along those lines, that now that they are in a spirit form, what we call demons, they are forever hungry. Would you like to elaborate on that text for just a minute, Aaron? Because you and I have talked about that privately before.
On what becomes to this, of these spirits? Well, that's in chapter 15 of Enoch here, and I think we better read the whole thing in one shot.
Very good. Go right ahead.
Alright. So it begins with God speaking to Enoch, and it says, "And he answered and said to me, O man of truth, O man who is the scribe of truth, he whose voice I have heard, do not fear, Enoch, man of truth and scribe of truth. Come here and hear my voice. Depart and say to those who sent you, you should be praying for man, and not men for you. Because of this you have abandoned the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and have slept with women, and have defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and have taken for yourselves wives as the sons of earth do, and have conceived for yourselves children, and your sons are earthborn. And though you were holy, and were spirits who live eternally, you have defiled yourselves with the blood of women, and have fathered children through blood and flesh, and have lusted after the blood of men, just as they do, and who are flesh and blood, who die and are destroyed. Because of this I gave them females, that they might impregnate them, and bear for them children in this way, so that all their ways might not cease upon the earth. But you were once spirits who lived eternally, and would not die throughout all the generations of the world. And because of this, I did not make for you females. For as for the spirits of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling. And now, the earthborn, having been conceived by both spirits and flesh, shall be mighty spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits will rise out of their body, because they have been wrought from above, and from the holy watchers is their origin of their creation. And their origin was desire. Therefore they shall be called evil spirits. As for the spirits of heaven, in heaven shall be their dwelling. And as for the spirits conceived upon earth shall be their dwelling. And the spirits of the earthborn shall be like clouds of injustice, corrupting and oppressing and wounding and scattering those who are upon the earth. So shall these vile spirits of the earthborn do. And they shall continue their course, and shall eat nothing, but shall hunger and thirst and stumble. And these spirits shall rise up against the sons of men and women, because they have come from them.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Now you have particular insight as to why you run across these entities, and they can be quite psychotic. At times they're quite docile and willing to converse with you. At other times there is no reasoning with them. They're quite psychotic, and that just come out because their hunger and their thirst continues after their death. And that's what they all are right now, is dead. And that hunger and thirst continues. Aaron?
You once told me that you have known that a lot of demon-possessed people tend to be overweight.
That is correct. They usually, over the course of time, will get heavier and heavier and have uncontrollable appetites. This is well documented inside the church, but of course they keep these things under the rug. There's no such thing out in academia. But this has been grossly known through the centuries, Aaron. It's been grossly known.
Well, when you read about some of the greatest serial killers in history, is like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, they described that they were in a daze-like state, like something, like they went into another state. And if they were demonically possessed and they were serial murderers and rapists, that could really help us, give us insight to what demonic possession really is that in serial killers such as that, it really shows their insane desire to do something.
Well, Aaron, we already touched on that. You just read it. Because you have to understand everything that God stated. He was very clear in this discourse directed at the angels. You just have to realize everything that he said and put it into its proper context. He made himself perfectly clear that this was driven by lust and earthly desires. You read it yourself, but you didn't quite catch it. Let me read verse 5. Because of this I gave them females. Now what's he talking about, ladies and gentlemen? He just described it to you. He just gave it to you, both barrels. Let's go back to verse 4. And though you were holy and you were spirits, i.e., they were angels who live eternally, you have defiled yourselves with the blood of women, and you have fathered children through the blood and flesh, and have lusted after the blood of men, just as they do, who are flesh and blood, and who die and are destroyed. On to verse 5 now. Because of this, I gave them females, that they might impregnate them and bear for them children in this way, so that all their ways not cease upon the earth. But you were once spirits who lived eternally, and would not die throughout all the generations of the world. And because of this, I did not make for you females, as for the spirits of heaven, and heaven is their dwelling. Now,
this all goes...
Now, wait a minute, let me finish. And now the earthborn, having been conceived by both spirit and flesh, shall be mighty spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. He goes on to continue the discourse that this lust is permeated in these evil spirits. Thus you get rapists that are serial killers. It usually goes hand in hand, Aaron, and he did come out and tell you. He just used 5 or 6 different verses to relay the thought.
Well, as we read about them drinking blood, I wonder if that's why some of them are driven to kill. That's one thing, and another thing might be rage, I think, and hatred.
Well, mingled with being ravenous. Like I said, there's times they can be quite docile, overtly perfect IQs, and in other times they're quite psychotic. That you can't reason with them at all.
Well, we know that people, a lot of the serial killers ate their victims, and another thing, like Ted Bundy, he bit his victims. So, that's another thing.
Yes, but let's get back to the text before we run out of time. We're already 20 minutes into it. So, let's get back to the text, shall we?
Well, when you were reading about humans having females, but God didn't give them females, this has led to a lot of controversy about if Genesis 6 is actually talking about angels or people. And they say, they all go back to Matthew chapter 22, verse 30. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage. They are of the angels of God in heaven. So most people reject this, that the angels had children or could marry. But if you read this text, right, this text that we have before us, it's not saying that it's impossible, but it says they are not given in marriage. And that goes back to where, when Christ said, as in the days before the flood, they were taking and giving in marriage.
And more importantly, when referencing those of the first resurrection, they're actually doing the job of angels in the kingdom of heaven. So, but enough of that. I could get into a long discourse about that, but that's exactly how those of the first resurrection operate. No doubt about it. They have dominion. They've been given the dominion of the angels, and they run this planet literally. So, but yes, that definitely ties into this. And of course we have Jude that comes right out and tells you that they clothed themselves in flesh, and yada, yada, yada. So we don't need to really discuss Genesis chapter 6 and the lies that the church propagates about it being not angels when it clearly is, because, well, Jude says that it is. They committed the sin exactly, giving you the perfect representation of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. They found a catch-22. Instead of taking the women in marriage, they allowed the women to rape them. That's why the entire townsfolk in Genesis 18 and 19, every man, woman, and child wanted to rape those angels to produce these earthborn on their behalf. So, we better get back to Actus Reus, Aaron.
Alright, so as we really get into what they were doing, what did they want? What were they really, before I get any further, in, Enoch chapter 6 verses, Enoch chapter 9 verses 6 to 10, the archangels, when bringing their petition to God, they, explain what Azazel has done. And it says, "You see what Azazel has done, who has taught all ways of unrighteousness upon the earth, and has revealed the eternal secrets of heaven, so that enough of it has become known to man. And Semyaza, who has given the authority to him to rule with him, being together. And they have gone forth to the daughters of the men of the earth, and they have slept with them, and have defiled themselves, and have revealed to them all kinds of sins. And the women have conceived titans, by which has all the earth been filled with blood and sin. And now, behold, the dying souls are crying out and pleading into the gates of heaven, and their groaning ascends, and are not able to stop because of the presence of lawlessness being committed upon the earth." So, notice the key words here, okay? It says, first, they taught all ways of unrighteousness, have revealed the eternal secrets. Then it says, they went to the daughters of men, slept with them, and defiled themselves, and have revealed to them all kinds of sin. But I think this is the most important word in verse 10. It says, it calls it lawlessness. And I think, I'm going to move on to chapter 16, verse 3, and it says, "Say to them, you were once in heaven, and no mystery was not revealed to you, and the mystery from God was made known to you. So you have shown this to the women in your hard-heartedness, and through this mystery, and the females and the men have multiplied the evil upon the earth." And when we go to chapter 8, we really get to what these angels were really doing, what they were really teaching. And I'm just going to go ahead and read the whole chapter, and I hope something really sticks out to you, and I've alluded to it in other broadcasts. Okay, and it says, "And Azazel taught mankind to make swords and weapons and shields and breastplates, the teachings of the angels, and submitted them metals and their crafts, and bracelets and decorations and antimony, and how to make themselves beautiful to behold, and taught them all precious stones and dye. And there arose much ungodliness, and they acted immorally, and seduced, and became corrupt in all their ways. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cutting, Armoros, breaking enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokariel, the celestial simology. Saviel, astroscopy. Sariel, the ways of the moon. And then it ends with, "And as men perished, their cry ascended to heaven."
So, a lot of these things have got nothing to do with, well, magic. Now, I find it interesting that right from the get-go, we have the making of weapons, and that's one of the things that I wanted to bring out, was that that word there that you used for weapons is quite interesting to me. Because when we take a look at that in the New Testament, that word is used for the tearing down of strongholds. That same exact word there. And that makes it quite curious. It is G3696. And it is used in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down or the demolition of strongholds. So right there you get the idea that well, I think a better translation might be implements, because it obviously means tools used for the demolition of, as it's put there, strongholds or fortresses. So your thoughts on that first list and why this particular angels were doing what is contained in that verse alone.
In the first verse, Aziel is specifically described, okay? And as formerly, it was talking all about Semyaza and what he did, but I think the fall was always under the mastermind of Aziel, or Azazel as he is now. He taught the ways of destruction and death. As you read there, the two things he basically taught was war and seduction. Okay? War as in teaching how to make weapons, how to make armor, and then how to make yourself beautiful. Okay? And that's something that really sticks out about this Aziel character. But then when you move on to the next ones that have some a lot more simple things, like teaching enchantments and root cutting, taught astrology, semiology, and on and on. Those things are not necessarily negative. Okay? They were basically just teaching simple, not simple, but I don't know, I struggle to find the right word, but not specifically negative. But I think Aziel's intent is very clear as a part of from the other angels, and I think the other angels had possibly a positive intent in mind, but were led astray to sin and by the wiles of Aziel himself, and with the things that he taught about these implements, and the use of metal. I always thought this tied back to Tubal-Cain in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, and it says, "As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah." And I think the Jews always associated this specific family to these angels. As we know, Naamah, within legend and so, was said to have been the woman who specifically seduced Semyaza and Aziel. And perhaps this specific woman, their connection to her also brought their connection to this Tubal-Cain, who Aziel obviously taught him how to make his implements, possibly for war.
Which a war would only be in exercising dominion over somebody else's region they'd been assigned to. So, this brings up the other list that seems to be, well, as you pointed out, not necessarily bad. Let's take a look at verse 5. Now, that particular verse, unfortunately, comes up in Isaiah 47 again, and we just talked about that on the last program. The simple fact that this is talking about, the virgin daughter of Babylon. And here we have this word for, let's see here, you translated it astrology. It's right here in Isaiah chapter 47, verse 13. "Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let thy astrologers and stargazers, the monthly procrastinators, stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee." So here we have a targeted verse against exactly what these particular angels were teaching. And that's enough to blow you away when you look at the text itself. Now, I find that rather interesting, that they were teaching these things, and is this how they were going to plan their warfare? I.e., they would know what particular season to do it in and when that would be permitted. And where did you find? Did you find any other links to Scripture with this particular list? Because I find it pretty important that we have here almost 3 right in a row. We have astrology, celestial symbology, and astroscopy, I guess. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I'm not quite sure what that is. And then verse 8, the ways of the moon. So do you think they were teaching the best time to plan their warfare? Or were they going beyond that? Of course, it would be the perfect time to plant your seeds, because you don't know if rains were going to come or frost was going to come too early. So your thoughts on that?
I really think that all the other of these princes had the notion that they wanted to teach things such as when to plant your food. I think what's really clear here is that Azael was always the one who had a negative plan, and I think he was really alluding to that, and brought his own rebellion against heaven eventually, as something I hope to touch on in the future. That and then you mentioned something about astroscopy. It means literally to observe the stars.
So that would play into this being a positive side of the connotations. They would be able to teach when exactly was the perfect day according to the signs, because like I said, everyone is fully aware what happens if you plant your crops because you're having good weather this week and you want to get them in the ground as early as possible. And when they sprout, you get a frost and it'll nuke your entire crop. So this can be tied into that. And they could be using these on the positive way because, well, you would know, you'd be able to tell when your enemy was planning to attack you and thus defend yourselves from them. So I'm going to have to agree with you that that's the way this seems to be pointing to. Can you talk about verse 8 and the ways of the moon? What is that exactly in Greek?
Well, it's actually a compound word. I mean, it's Selene Agogius. And it means, the first one, the ways, actually in the end is, it's actually at the end of this word in Greek, but best translated in English as this. And it means to lead or carry, or accession.
So what's your thoughts on that? Why? So you think that means that the position of the moon, because it is 5 degrees off the Earth's equator, and we're directly on the ecliptic. We're 0 degrees on our ecliptic. So you think he was doing that, or was it piercing to include being able to predict both lunar and solar eclipses? What's your thoughts?
Well, with this serial specifically, let's consider what the moon does to anything. Okay? We know that the word lunatic comes from it means to be influenced by the moon. This is actually used in the scriptures pertaining to demonically possessed boy. It calls him a lunatic. So, with that being said, I don't think necessarily it was talking about how humans react, but most fishers know that fish are best for catching at a certain phase of the moon, specifically the full moon. That's your best hope to catch anything.
So you think that this was a part of the what people call astrology, setting up the best times to do certain things. And I agree with you. I don't think that these were overtly negative, but what they were trying to do is whichever group of people they were with, they were obviously getting them to excel in supernatural ways outside of what was normal, outside of what God designed. Because if you had supernatural information because you knew the ways of the moon and you knew that today was going to be a supermoon, the moon was going to be at its closest approach to the earth, that might trigger a frost. I mean, we have literally no idea. This is angelic information. So, literally, we have, with the first angel mentioned, the warfare and seduction. Now, of course, we know one of the prime examples of seduction used was with the two spies. We know that Rahab survived because that's what she was doing. And you need to put that into the equation. Of course, we have the infamous Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Clearly, Cleopatra was able to seduce Mark Antony and sway the entire Roman Empire. No doubt about that. That's just a matter of historical fact. So, it looked like that the first and foremost angel, he taught the warfare and the seduction, which led to much corruption. So he was finding a way they could exercise dominion over their neighbors and thus create an empire on the ground. And the rest of the angels was giving them supernatural information how they might prosper beyond what was normal. And thus, supernaturally, be able to create the groundwork for a mighty kingdom. That's what it looks like to me. And I find it very interesting that we did talk about this enchantments in the last episode, and the simple fact that this is, well, its root is ode and can mean chant. But why don't you talk about verse 4? Because that angel, he taught to break them. What's your thoughts on that? What's your feelings on that?
Well, this angel, specifically Armoros, is a very mysterious entity within the Book of Enoch. As you can see in chapter 6, his name is, in the Greek, his name is spelled Ereros. And then in the Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch, it says Hermione, as in Hermon, the Mount Hermon, where these angels descended. But outside of this text, there's another Greek text of this. I don't know if it says it's the fragments of Georgius Syncellus in his Chronographia, and he spells it this way in a very peculiar manner. He spells it Pharmeros, and it always just shocked me. Was he possibly trying to guide us to Pharmakia? And we know, as we touched in the last episode, Pharmakia is the Greek form of the scapegoat ritual.
That's right, it is. So you're saying that this translation that you have here, this could be a pet name, much like they do mine. Most people that are named Matthew, it's shortened to Matt. So you're saying that that is what's at play here.
I'm not even sure it seems like there's so many different ways this name is interpreted, and that's why he's so mysterious within this text. And even the Ethiopic translations don't agree with what the Aramaic says is Hermione. It always goes with this Armoros form. But, so, whoever this guy is, he played a very important role. And he says here that he broke the enchantment. Semyaza, who was originally the highest leader, says that he taught enchantments and how to, and this root cutting. So he taught how to do this, but this Armro taught how to break those enchantments. So as to, like if somebody cursed you, he could undo it. He could undo that curse.
Which, boy, that throws everything into confusion, don't it? Because the church teaches that you can't curse somebody. That just throws everything right out the window. Let's talk about verse 6 for a minute. Celestial semology, this word that you have here translated, is in the Bible, and more importantly, it's in the New Testament, no less than 3 verses. Mark chapter 16, verse 20, and they went forth and preached everywhere, and the Lord working with them and confirming the word with signs following. Amen. It actually includes the word amen. John chapter 2, verse 11, this beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. Romans chapter 15 and verse 19. Through mighty signs and wonders by the power of the Spirit of God, so that from Jerusalem and round about into Iconium I have fully preached the gospel of Christ. Your thoughts on this particular word here and your translation of it?
Well, semiology, I added celestial here, okay? Because this angel specifically is Kokariel. This is actually a degraded form of Kokabiel. It should be Kokabiel. And Kokabiel goes straight to Isaiah chapter 14, where it says, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. That is Isaiah chapter 14, verse 13. If you look into the Hebrew text, it takes the name apart into Kokabiel, but his name is literally here. Okay, I will read the verse. I'll actually read the entire part here, specifically talking about this fall. Okay, verses 12 to 14. Okay, and it says, "Oh, how you have fallen from heaven, O Halel, son of the dawn! You have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and will make myself like the Most High." So, with all these things in consideration, this claim that this angel, this Halel, who I believe is Azael and Azazel, the same entity all in one, where he's making this proclamation that he ambitiously wants to take up a place in heaven. But before we go there, I want to touch on what you said. Why you think I translated it into celestial semiology? No, I put celestial in italics because that word is not present. But the name of Kokabiel means the star of God. So that's why I believe that's the semiology he was talking about.
And it's pretty obvious from that word, G4649. That's exactly what he was talking about. So I completely agree with you. I just wanted your clarification on that it takes looking into the text completely in order to come up with some of your translation here. You have to know the etymology, the roots of the word, as you've exemplified here twice. So let's read this last verse. And as men perished. Now, Aaron, it's saying that because they taught all of these things, men was perishing. And like I said, this to me has everything to do with providing men supernatural ways to exercise dominion over their neighbors. Literally, what you have these angels doing is trying to create for a better use, a type of chosen people. These people that they took up residence with, much like in Sodom and Gomorrah before God nuked it, these angels had came to a particular group of people so that they could exercise dominion over their neighbors, thus creating a chosen people.
Well, yes, and as we touched in former broadcast, we talked about how that maybe they wanted their children, these Nephilim, to be their messiahs. And who was Jesus Christ? That he was the King of the Jews. He was the king. He will have his throne in Jerusalem, and we know that God's people are specifically the Israelites. So, with all that being said, what if these angels what is a Messiah without his people?
Exactly, I agree. And you know what catches my attention in the next chapter is the reason why God got involved. And I take note who it was. Of course, they call them the four major angels, but it says that they stooped down, and from heaven they saw much blood shed upon the earth. Now, it's here, it wasn't from heaven, but when they stooped down, they saw, and then it said they heard the cries of the earth has reached the gates of heaven. And it says, verse 3, the souls of men plead, saying, bring our accusation before the Most High. This was the triggering event.
Just as in the last days of Revelation, as shown in Revelation, the fifth seal speaks about this intercession where the martyrs are pleading for God's interaction of the evil that is being done to the Christians, and that's something, and it's something that's really reflected here. That same thing, as we know, in that intercession where God, in that seal being broken, that intercession, God says, wait a little time longer. Then the sixth seal, when that is broken, then the real tribulation begins. That's when God steps in.
And we know that's exactly what happened in this case.
Yes, exactly.
He stepped in and took care of it with the flood. Now, the whole problem there being is God promised not to do it with the flood again, which is truly the reason why, oh my goodness, Aaron, it's going to get ugly in the tribulation. It's going to get ugly. But I thought it pertinent that we bring that out, that is exactly what happens with the fifth seal event. There is a cry that goes out, and it's answered by God himself. So, Aaron, your closing comments on what it was they taught and the reason for them teaching these particular things, because they could have taught anything, but yet it seems to me their goal was to set up residence with a particular kingdom here. At that time, it would have been tribes, but they were trying to instigate empires. They were going to take residence up with a certain particular group of people, give them supernatural knowledge so that they would get supernatural increase with crops, and if plague struck, they would be able to be healed, whereas the neighboring peoples, the neighboring countries, not be able to do so. And then they would have their children operate as these messiahs. So literally they were trying to create from the ground up, hence the term earthborn, from the ground up, a chosen people. I find that absolutely off the charts. Do you agree with the way I see it or not? What's your view of it?
Yes, I agree that it was a dominion thing. They wanted to make themselves gods. They wanted to make their children demigods, and this ended up turning into war and eventually destruction. So, because, well, as we also touched in a former broadcast, that if there's more than one Messiah, there's going to be a battle of these false messiahs over each other. Because when it comes right down to it, who is the Messiah? There was indefinitely going to be war. This is war that is literally shown in most, if not all, other religions and mythologies where different gods are fighting against each other. That's specifically shown in Greek mythology, where their gods keep fighting over each other, okay? Because if you become godless, it's you only have so much power, you know? So, if you have one so-called god contending against the other, there's only going to be war and battle ensuing.
So, yeah, that would be interesting if each of these angels had taken up residence in different places and they were planning on hopscotching. But I understand exactly what you're talking about. Let's say when the Assyrians conquered Babylon, they were absorbed, and they also conquered the Chaldeans. And here you have these. Now, let me make myself clear. We know that the Chaldeans had specific, shall we say, preternormal information of the heavens. I mean, that's where we get all of our constellations, point blank. And we know that the Babylonians had their particular strong points. So, but we know that could not continue. Eventually, these sub-portions of any empire begin to war with each other. That's inevitable. But before that was permitted, they were not even permitted to create this empire, and God brought it down with the flood. But that's exactly what Satan allows them to do when he puts his hands behind his back and passes over his authority to the scapegoat. This is exactly what and you see that right from the get-go. They make everybody line up and take their mark. And we have, at long last, a one world order with these monsters as the heads. And literally, all the people they'll get what they want, won't they, Aaron? They'll get what they want. I mean, it's really what they want. So this magnifies the verses in the Bible talking about those who go after signs and wonders, they're going to get their signs and wonders all right. Full throttle, with no abating. And these monsters are going to do with them whatever they want. And they just cannot understand. Just like the children of Israel when they cried out for a king. Give us a king, give us a king, give us a king. God said, all right, I'll give you a king. He'll even stand a head above the rest. And I'll take him and shove him down your throat. And you'll wish you never had a king. So it's chilling to think that all of these things are literally directly pointing to what it's really going to be like during the tribulation. So, Aaron, your closing comments and your goodbyes, please.
Well, once again, if any of you have questions about verses we failed to cite, please ask us about it, and we'll get those for you if we ever miss anything. Okay. So yeah, God bless. Until next time.
Christian Conspiracy Theory, signing off.